Corey Brada from the Hawkeye of the Storm here at our Iowa at the Voice of College Football channel with a special check-in here on Monday. Wanted to address something that we kind of ignored last week, and I do think it's a situation that we should address, and that is the impending transfer, I should say, of Josiah Miamen, Iowa's really their third tight end. I mean, he's been the third guy in the lineup. Iowa hasn't really ran a whole lot of three tight end sets, if any, this year. Maybe they did late in the Purdue game. I know Josiah saw some time there. He saw some time in the Maryland game. But I really don't think so. They really have not run three tight end sets very much. Josiah, if you remember his background, he was a fairly highly touted kid. He was out of Dunlap, Illinois. Got into some trouble during this past off season. With the police, was at a bar and involved with a situation, and my understanding is he took off. Police were able to chase him down, and at that moment, when that news broke, I believe that was last spring, my thoughts were, actually it was prior to spring practice, so it may have actually been in January or early February. My thoughts at the time were, he's done. There was just too much as far as legal issues there. I know just one incident, but I did not foresee a situation where Josiah would reclaim a positive status on this football team. And I was wrong. He worked back into the good graces of Kirk Ferentz and this offense. We saw Josiah just weeks later on the field. Now, he was suspended for a period of time, but he came back, was working on the field with Iowa's offense during spring practice. Must have had a pretty good summer. Was competing with Luke Lachey for that tight end 2 spot. Ultimately, Lachey, I mean, clearly we can recognize the fact that he ended up winning that job. But Miamen was right there at number 3. At least we thought he was. And then this news broke just this past week that he would be transferring, or at least entering his name into the portal. So what does this mean for Iowa going forward? Well, first of all, let's realize what Iowa's losing. And, of course, transfers are part of college football now. That's just part of the game. But let's remember, and sometimes, especially with football, you can kind of read too much into offer lists and whatnot. But let's just remember that Josiah was a highly touted kid. So he's 6'4", at least coming out of high school. He was 6'4", 225. And he had a lot of Big Ten offers. I mean, Iowa was not the only Big Ten school calling his name. Illinois offered Josiah. This is all according to 247 Sports. Michigan offered Josiah. Michigan State, Northwestern. So obviously the academics lined up with Northwestern. He was also offered by Notre Dame. Penn State offered. Purdue offered. Wisconsin offered. Those are just Big Ten. And of course, I mentioned Notre Dame in there as well. Vandy also offered Western Michigan. Princeton. So if we're talking about academics, Princeton out of the Ivy League offered him. Kent State offered, and Illinois State offered. Now, this is according to 247 Sports. I'm sure there's other offers out there that they don't have noted here. But the point is, this is a highly touted kid. Again, likes of Michigan, Penn State, Notre Dame, all offering Josiah. So I guess worst case scenario, if you want to call it that for Iowa fans, he ends up transferring to a team like Northwestern. You know, I don't know if he will do that, or a team like Michigan. Certainly, probably the worst case scenario would be him transferring to Illinois or Wisconsin. I think those two teams, especially Wisconsin, but Illinois, they're one of those teams that I think you grab a couple pieces. Brett Bielema, as much as he's a Hawkeye at heart, I have a ton of confidence that he would love nothing more than not only to beat Iowa this coming weekend, but to be able to steal, I don't want to say a prized recruit, but a fairly highly touted kid. Of course, Josiah was recruited by the previous administration, Lovie Smith, so I have no idea if Brett would be able to convince Josiah to come over to Champaign, but certainly Paul Christ, they've kind of dealt with some injury issues at tight end this year. Obviously, Jake Ferguson is an upperclassman, so he'll be moving on here soon. Barry Alvarez's son or grandson. So, you know, maybe Wisconsin becomes an option. Regardless, you can't hold a grudge against a kid who's moving on. I'm a little bit surprised by the move. Again, we don't know what's going on behind the scenes, but it just seemed like I would assume Josiah really worked his way back into the good graces of this coaching staff to see him move on somewhat quickly is a bit surprising, but he was not in the top 2. Now, as far as the implications for this roster, Iowa's good right now, right? Because they're not running a whole lot of 3 tight end sets anyways, but injuries do happen. We've been very fortunate to stay healthy at the tight end position. Sam Laporta, we've seen him limp off the field a couple of times. He's a tough guy. He's never actually missed any time. Luke Lachey has not missed any time. I'd like to see him get involved in the passing game more. Who is after those guys? Who's tight end 3 now? It's pretty thin at tight end, and that's why I wanted to jump on here and discuss this, because we've kind of maybe ignored this over the past week, and that's my fault. But I think you're probably looking at a guy like Bryce Schulte, who local kid out of Cedar Rapids Xavier. He's a walk-on, and I'm not trying to talk down on walk-ons. Certainly there have been a fair number of walk-ons who have had success here. I think of guys like Nate Weeding, Peter Picard, I believe, was a walk-on, and certainly you could go even further back of walk-ons who ended up having good careers at Iowa as a tight end. But let's just run through the tight ends Iowa has on its roster now. Schulte, who's a walk-on. Andrew Lynch, he's a tight end freshman out of Dowling. He's a walk-on. Johnny Pascuzzi out of Olathe, Kansas. He's a freshman walk-on. Dad's a filmmaker, by the way, and author. Tommy Kuyava, he is a senior. He was a walk-on. I haven't heard a whole lot from him as far as his name being tossed around for playing time, at least on offense, and I'm not good about tracking who's on the field during special teams, but he'll be moving on conceivably. Jackson Frericks, he's a sophomore walk-on out of Cedar Falls. And that's it. That's it at tight end. So, who's that third guy? I mean, the only other guy, one guy I didn't mention, Elijah Yelverton. He's the only other scholarship guy, redshirt freshman out of Texas. So, if you're the coaching staff right now, you're probably hoping that Elijah, I don't know where he's at in his development, you're hoping he can take a step forward. Certainly Bryce Schulte is an experienced guy as a senior, and he's seen the field over the course of his career here and there. Not really any meaningful snaps, but I would guess, just based on what we've seen, Bryce Schulte would be that third tight end they would turn to at this point, if need be. Again, I don't foresee Iowa running any 3 tight end sets now that Josiah's gone. They weren't doing it with him here. And then Elijah Yelverton, you hope he can, you used a scholarship on this kid. Again, he's a redshirt freshman. Haven't really heard his name tossed around very much, but they're thin. They're thin at that position. And typically Iowa's going to have 4 to 5 tight ends on scholarship during a season. Again, they do have walk-ons that seem to make their way into the rotation at times, but to only have once Miamen moves on, which of course he's in the transfer portal now, once he moves on, this is a very thin group of tight ends. So, a bit of a concern there. As far as where Iowa turns to in its upcoming recruiting class, remember they do have a couple of tight end recruits. Cale Vanderbush, a kid that we talked about just about a month ago, I believe, 6'6", out of Indiana, tall kid. I think I kind of, if you want to watch that evaluation, I believe we posted a video right here at this channel about Cale. I'm no expert on his tape. I've watched a little bit of Cale in high school, but he's a very good pass catcher. He's going to have to learn how to block at this level. He's going to have to learn how to run crisper routes at the Big Ten level. That's normal. That's assuming Iowa sticks him at tight end. Another guy to watch would be Addison Ostrenga, the kid out of Wisconsin who ended up committing to Iowa. Not a very highly touted football recruit, but 6'5", 220. He's an athlete. Again, assuming they keep him at tight end, those two guys could have a chance at fairly early playing time if it doesn't pan out with guys like Yelverton or one of the walk-ons coming up. Assuming Schulte moves on, which I guess he could come back due to COVID, even as a walk-on. I don't know exactly how that works. There's no scholarship there, so is he paying his way for another year in school. Obviously, they could award him a scholarship, but again, that's all just speculation at this point. So Ostrenga and Cale Vanderbush, would a guy like Cale Crow out of Huxley, just south of us here in Ames, would he be a guy, he's 6'6", 265, so he's your prototypical tackle. Could he make a move over to tight end? Yeah, I just find this kind of interesting. Again, I don't know the last time. I'd have to look back at every year under Ferentz. Last time Iowa's had only 3 tight ends on scholarship here. Is there a possibility that Josiah ends up returning? I guess that's possible. We saw that happen with Davion Nixon a few years ago, and then, of course, he had a terrific final year at Iowa last year, but it's more than likely not going to happen. I can count on one hand, probably with 1 or 2 fingers, of guys I remember that entered the portal here at Iowa and then returned. It just doesn't happen. So best of wishes to Josiah Miamen, but Iowa's tight end room is a question mark. Expect those 4 guys, really, 2 of which are going to be competing for that third tight end spot. Laporta, obviously, is your number 1 guy. Lachey's your number 2. Would like to see him get more involved these last couple of regular season weeks. And then I would expect Schulte to be number 3 unless Yelverton can overtake him. And then it's a series of walk-ons after that. They do have some young guys, but they are all walk-ons. So we'll see if somebody there can emerge. And as we know, the tight end position coach is Brian Ferentz. So just wanted to check in with everybody here on a Monday. Hope you're having a great start to your week. We will be talking to you later this week about Iowa football and Iowa, Illinois coming up this coming Saturday. Thank you for joining us for From the Hawkeye of the Storm and Iowa, the voice of college football. We'll talk to you soon. Go Hawks.